30 seconds ago, you liked him. Genuinely, uncomplicatedly liked him. He reaches for his drink, laughs at his own joke a beat too long, and something inside you just turns off. Not gradually, instantly, like a switch, flipping in a room you didn't know how to switch. You spend the rest of the night trying to find your way back to how you felt 30 seconds ago, and you can't. It's gone, and you don't even know why. You run through the moment later, trying to reverse engineer it. Was it the laugh? The way he held the glass? You genuinely cannot locate the crime, because there wasn't one. Not in any way your conscious mind can point to and defend in an argument. And that's the part that actually bothers you, more than the feeling itself. If someone asked you to justify it in court, you'd lose. There's no evidence. There's no red flag. There's just a door that used to be open, and now, for reasons you cannot produce on demand, it's closed, and no amount of reasoning with yourself is going to reopen it tonight. Most people call this the ick, shrug, and move on. But something real happened in that half second, something with actual machinery behind it, and once you see the machinery, you'll never think of this feeling the same way again. Welcome back to Mind to Act. Today we're breaking down the real psychology of the ick, why attraction can collapse in under a second, what your brain is actually doing in that moment, and why the speed of the shutdown is the biggest clue to what's really going on. Let's start with where this connects in the research, because the ick isn't its own separate system, it's borrowing one. Psychologists studying disgust, going back to foundational work by Paul Rozin, found that disgust isn't one single emotion with one single job. It has multiple layers, and one of the newer ones identified by researchers is what's sometimes called social or moral disgust. The same neural circuitry originally built to protect you from contaminated food and disease, repurposed by evolution to protect you from something else entirely, bad social investments. Here's what makes this genuinely strange. Brain imaging studies have found real overlap between the regions activated by physical disgust, the reaction to something rotten or diseased, and the regions activated by social and moral disgust, the reaction to a person's behavior. Your brain did not build a separate alarm system for romantic misjudgment. It borrowed one that already existed, one built over millions of years to make an extremely fast decision about something that used to be genuinely life or death. Don't eat that. It might kill you. Here's the part that changes everything. Disgust, unlike almost every other emotion, is designed to be instant and involuntary on purpose. Fear can be reasoned with. Attraction can be built slowly over months. Disgust is built to skip reasoning entirely, because in its original context, hesitating to think it over was the actual danger. An animal that paused to rationally evaluate spoiled meat before rejecting it was an animal with a shorter lifespan than one that recoiled immediately, without discussion, without evidence, without a court case. That's not a bug in the system. That's the entire point of the system. It exists specifically to bypass your slower, more deliberative thinking, because deliberation was never the priority. Speed was. Here's the simplest way to picture what's happening underneath. Imagine two completely different security systems guarding the same building. One is a thoughtful human guard who reviews footage, checks references, considers context, and takes their time reaching a verdict. That's most of your decision-making about people. Should I trust them? Should I date them? Should I give this a second chance? But there's a second system in the same building, a motion-activated alarm wired directly to the exits, built to trip instantly at a specific pattern, with zero interest in context, explanation, or fairness. The ick is that second system going off. It was never designed to hold a trial. It was designed to slam the door before the slow, careful guard even finishes reading the file. So, how does this actually show up in real life? Here are the signs. Sign 1. The trigger is almost always small, and the reaction is wildly disproportionate to it. A laugh held a beat too long. A specific word choice. The way someone chews or texts or holds a fork. On paper, none of these are moral failures, and if you tried to explain the reaction to a stranger using only the trigger itself, you would sound unreasonable. That gap, between the tiny size of the trigger and the enormous size of the shutdown, is the clearest fingerprint that you're not looking at logic. You're looking at an alarm system responding to a pattern match, not a crime. Sign 2. You cannot argue yourself back into the feeling, no matter how hard you try. This is one of the strangest parts of the whole experience. You can list every genuinely good quality the person has. You can remind yourself that nothing has actually changed except your perception of one moment. None of it works. Disgust responses are famously resistant to rational counter-argument because the entire circuit was built to override reasoning, not negotiate with it. You are trying to talk a smoke alarm out of an alarm using logic, and smoke alarms don't have ears. Sign 3. The feeling arrives with a physical sensation, not just a mental judgment. A tightening, a pulling back, sometimes something close to nausea. This isn't drama or exaggeration. It's the actual disgust circuitry firing exactly the way it would for a physical contaminant, because as far as that ancient part of your brain is concerned, that's precisely what just happened. Something in your environment got flagged as bad, and your body reacted the same way it would to bad food, because it's running the same original code. Sign 4. Once the switch flips, it rarely flips back for that specific moment, even if the relationship itself continues. You might stay. You might genuinely still like the person overall. But some tiny piece of that particular interaction gets permanently filed under contaminated, and no amount of good behavior afterward fully erases that one file. The system that logs disgust triggers is built for long-term memory, on purpose, because forgetting what made you sick once was historically a good way to get sick again. Sign 5. You often feel a flash of guilt immediately after, because the trigger seems too small to justify the size of your reaction. This guilt is actually useful information, but not in the direction most people take it. It doesn't necessarily mean you overreacted. It usually means your conscious mind and your alarm system disagree about the size of the threat, and your conscious mind is the one apologizing for a decision it wasn't actually in charge of making. Sign 6. The pattern that triggers it for you is often oddly specific and consistent across different people. Maybe it's always some version of neediness. Maybe it's always some version of arrogance, or weakness, or a particular kind of clumsiness. This isn't random. Your alarm system was calibrated somewhere, usually early, often by watching what made caregivers or early relationships feel unsafe, and it has been quietly running that same specific pattern match ever since, on every candidate who walks near it. Now here's the part that matters most, the part almost nobody says out loud. The ick is not proof that you're shallow, or commitment-phobic, or incapable of real connection. It's proof that you have a functioning threat detection system doing exactly the job it evolved to do, sometimes firing on outdated or overly broad targets, the same way a smoke alarm sometimes goes off from burnt toast instead of an actual fire. The alarm isn't lying about being an alarm. It's just occasionally miscalibrated about what actually deserves the siren. So, what does this actually cost you if you never learn to work with it? It costs you good relationships that get killed by a false positive, because the system genuinely cannot tell the difference between a real character flaw and a nervous habit that simply resembles one from childhood. It costs you self-trust, because getting the ick repeatedly and not understanding it leads a lot of people to conclude something's wrong with them, when the actual issue is an overactive but well-intentioned alarm. And it costs you the ability to distinguish signal from noise, because if every alarm gets treated as equally serious, you lose the ability to tell the difference between the alarm that's protecting you from someone genuinely unsafe and the alarm that's just misfiring on a laugh. So how do you actually work with this, instead of simply obeying every single alarm automatically? 3 principles. Principle 1. Separate the speed of the reaction from the size of the threat. Fast doesn't automatically mean accurate. It just means the system prioritized speed over deliberation, which made sense for spoiled food and makes far less sense for a laugh at a bar. When the ick hits, the honest first question isn't, "Is this real?" It's, "How big was the actual trigger?" Because that comparison alone starts training your slower thinking to weigh in. Principle 2. Look for the pattern across your own history, not just this one moment. If the exact same specific trait keeps triggering the alarm across completely different people, that's valuable data, but not necessarily data about them. It might be pointing you towards something from your own history that got quietly coded as dangerous a long time ago, something worth understanding on its own terms instead of simply avoiding forever. Principle 3. Give small triggers a waiting period before treating them as verdicts. You don't have to override the alarm entirely, and you shouldn't. Some ick reactions are correctly identifying something real, but for the small, disproportionate ones, build in deliberate delay. Notice it, name it, and wait before deciding it's final, because the smoke alarm going off doesn't necessarily mean the house is burning down. Sometimes it just means the toast is a little dark, and normal life is still allowed to continue around it. There's an old idea in behavioral science that emotions are data, not directives. They're telling you something happened. They are not automatically telling you the correct response to it. The ick is one of the fastest, most convincing pieces of data your body will ever hand you, and precisely because it feels so certain, so instant, so undeniable, it's also one of the easiest to mistake for truth instead of simply a signal. Learning to tell the difference between the two might be the single most useful skill anyone chasing real connection can build. So tell me, out of the 6 signs we covered today, which one describes your own experience with this most closely? Tell me in the comments, and know this. If you've ever felt an attraction disappear instantly, for reasons you couldn't fully explain, it doesn't mean you're shallow, and it doesn't mean something is wrong with you. It means an old, fast, well-meaning system just did its job, possibly a little too enthusiastically. If this video finally explained a feeling you've never had words for, hit like and share it with someone who's been quietly confused about why a good thing suddenly felt wrong for no clear reason. Subscribe to Mind to Act so we can keep decoding the hidden corners of the mind together. Goodbye, and see you next time.